He didn't just hate slavery, he declared war on it. One midnight in October 1859, this weather-beaten farmer marched into Harper's Ferry with 21 men, a wagon of spears, and a plan to bring the South to its knees. Within 36 hours, 10 of his men were dead, 2 townspeople lay in the street, and the United States Army had Robert E. Lee on the scene. By sunrise, the country was screaming, "Martyr or terrorist? Stick around. By the end of this video, you'll be the jury." John Brown was born in 1800, the same year the federal government moved to Washington, D.C., and the same year enslaved people were barred from voting in almost every state. He grew up in Ohio, often witnessing the brutal spectacle of beatings on the town square. One childhood memory he never shook, seeing an enslaved boy his own age sold away from his mother. Brown later wrote, "I swore eternal war against slavery." He didn't say, "I dislike it." He said eternal war. That language matters because by age 12 he already thought in military terms. As an adult, he failed at farming, tanning, even sheep herding, but he succeeded at one thing: helping fugitives. The Underground Railroad wasn't some romantic subway, it was a brutal life-and-death road trip where bounty hunters could legally drag you back south. Brown didn't just offer shelter, he turned his farmhouse into a crucial pit stop, even teaching escaping families how to read by candlelight, a radical act. Moderate friends would often caution him, saying, "Good work, John, just keep it peaceful." But Brown, with the unsettling calm of a man ordering coffee, would simply reply, "Peaceful has not worked for 2 centuries." He wasn't just stating a fact, he was declaring a failure. In 1854, Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, letting settlers vote on slavery. Enter 2 groups, pro-slavery, border ruffians, and anti-slavery, free staters. Kansas quickly devolved into a brutal street fight, starting with ballots but swiftly escalating to brass knuckles, then bullets, and outright terror. Brown arrived in 1855 to find neighbors driven from their land, newspapers burned, and a preacher named Love shot dead while milking his cow. The night of May 24th, 1856, Brown led 4 of his sons and 2 other men to Pottawatomie Creek. They dragged 5 pro-slavery settlers from their cabins and hacked them with broadswords. Not rifles, broadswords. Brown believed bullets could miss, leaving doubt. Broadswords, however, sent an undeniable, visceral message. The country recoiled in horror. Northern newspapers, even some abolitionist ones, called it barbarous. Southern papers screamed Northern insurrection, seeing their worst fears confirmed. Brown, ever the pragmatist of violence, simply said, "I did it to make the slave question come to a head." His translation was stark. He wanted war, and he figured corpses would speed things up. Quick question for you. If someone murders your neighbor's oppressor, is that justice or terrorism? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm reading. While hiding in the Kansas brush, Brown drafted a document. Most history classes skip his Provisional Constitution. It wasn't just a rant, it was a meticulously crafted 44-article blueprint for an anti-slavery republic, complete with executive, legislative, and judicial branches, a full-fledged government in waiting. He signed it, Commander-in-Chief of the Army of the North. Think about that. This failed farmer was writing a new government while U.S. Marshals hunted him. Historian David Reynolds calls it the first American attempt at a refounding since 1787. Brown mailed copies to black leaders. Frederick Douglass read it and said, "The man means business." By 1859, Brown had raised just enough money, mostly from wealthy abolitionists nicknamed the Secret Six, to rent a farm across the river from Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His audacious plan: seize the federal arsenal, steal 100,000 rifles, arm enslaved people, and watch the South burn from within. A slave revolt he believed was divinely ordained. He told his daughter, "I may not return, but if I fall, the flag of liberty will still wave." On October 16th, he set out with 18 whites and 5 blacks, including 2 of his sons and Dangerfield newbie, a formerly enslaved man whose wife and children were still in chains. They cut telegraph wires, captured the armory guard, and waited for the hills to echo with freedom songs. Instead of freedom songs echoing through the hills, church bells rang out, a cacophony of alarm, not celebration, shattering his carefully laid plans. Local militia poured in, shooting from windows and ducking behind whiskey barrels. Within hours, townspeople were dead, Brown's sons were bleeding out, and Robert E. Lee arrived with U.S. Marines. The next morning, the Marines stormed the engine house. Brown stood in the doorway, sword broken, face bloodied, and told Lieutenant Israel Green, "You may dispose of me very easily, but the question of slavery is settled never to be resurrected again." Green cracked him with a saber, knocking him senseless. 10 raiders died on the spot, 7 more would hang later. Brown himself expected to be shot on the ground. Instead, he got a trial, and that changed everything. Smash that subscribe button if you want more stories where history reads like a thriller. We drop new videos every Tuesday. Virginia charged Brown with treason, specifically against the state, not the Union, a subtle yet crucial legal distinction in a fractured nation. In court, he looked like a prophet, long white beard, unflinching stare. When the prosecutor called him a traitor, Brown replied, "I deny every affiliation with the state of Virginia. I acknowledge only my obligation to God and the enslaved." In other words, he rejected their authority the way a hacker rejects your password. The jury took 45 minutes to convict. Judge Richard Parker sentenced him to hang in 1 month. Northern newspapers that had once mocked him now printed his words verbatim. Ralph Waldo Emerson called him the new saint. Victor Hugo warned the U.S. Senate from exile. Politically, John Brown's scaffold is the first nail in the American Union's coffin. Meanwhile, Southern whites formed vigilante groups, convinced every Northern clerk might spark a slave revolt. Secession talk, once whispered, now spiked like a fever. The election of 1860 wasn't just about politics anymore. It was a stark referendum on Brown's chilling shadow, irrevocably altering the national conversation. December 2nd, 1859 was crisp and cold. Brown rode to the gallows sitting on his coffin, reading a Bible verse, "He shall redeem their soul from deceit and violence." Witnesses said he looked calm, almost relieved. When the sheriff asked if he wanted a hood, Brown said, "No, I'm ready." At 11:15, the trapdoor swung. At 11:26, the doctor declared him dead. But the story didn't stop. Northern churches tolled their bells in mourning. Some rang 70 times. One solemn peal for each year slavery had existed on American soil, a powerful collective lament. In Boston, William Lloyd Garrison burned a copy of the Constitution, calling it a covenant with death. In Richmond, a militia captain named John Wilkes Booth watched the execution and muttered, "That old man died game." 6 years later, Booth would shoot Abraham Lincoln, partly convinced he was finishing what Brown started, a war for America's soul. Less than a year after Brown's body dangled, South Carolina seceded. Jefferson Davis told the Confederate Congress, "We are not fighting for slavery. We are fighting against John Brown's ghost." Frederick Douglass countered at a Boston rally, "John Brown's soul goes marching on," a line Julia Ward Howe would echo in The Battle Hymn of the Republic. The Civil War might have begun as a convoluted political conflict, but thanks to John Brown's uncompromising stand and ultimate sacrifice, it was undeniably transformed into a profound moral crusade against the very institution of slavery. By 1865, 620,000 Americans were dead, slavery was outlawed, and the flag Brown hoisted at Harper's Ferry, the 13-starred banner of rebellion, waved over Charleston's ruins. Historian David Blight succinctly argues, "Without Brown, no Civil War. Without Civil War, no emancipation, at least not in the 1860s. A powerful, unsettling truth underscoring Brown's monumental, albeit violent, legacy. If you're still on the fence about martyr versus terrorist, hit the poll card above and vote. I'll share the running tally in next week's episode. So, was John Brown freedom's sword or America's first domestic terrorist? He killed civilians, invoked God, and sparked a war. He also freed no slaves at Harper's Ferry, yet terrified the South into seceding, which in turn forced the North to crush slavery forever. Maybe the answer depends on where you sit. If your child were in chains, would you wait for a Senate vote? I promised you'd be the jury. Time to render your verdict. Drop martyr, terrorist, or both in the comments, and tell us why in one sentence. The best answer gets pinned, a shout-out on our Twitter, and eternal bragging rights in the land of YouTube history nerds. Thanks for watching. History isn't just dates, it's decisions people made when the night was dark and the stakes were everything. I'll see you next Tuesday with another Forgotten Saga.